Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet little corner of the cosmos where your thoughts can loosen their grip, and knowledge becomes a soft kind of lullaby for the night. Tonight, we'll be exploring a question that has followed humanity like a faint echo. The possibility that we are not the first civilization to ever rise upon this world. That long before us, other hands may have built and dreamed, leaving traces not in myth, but in stone, in ice, in chemistry itself. Maybe they breathed the same air, walked the same valleys, and wondered, just as we do now, whether they were alone. But before we begin drifting into that deep timeline, I'd love if you could take a moment to settle in. Maybe dim the lights, maybe let a gentle sound hum in the background. A fan, the night outside your window, a soft pulse of rain. If you'd like, take a slow breath in and let it out again. You don't have to think too much right now. Just know that this journey isn't about proving or disproving anything. It's about curiosity, that small, quiet spark that connects every species that ever dared to wonder. And if your mind begins to wander halfway through, if the edges blur and the words start to fade, that's perfectly fine. The ideas will keep floating here, patiently, like silt settling in still water. Whenever you're ready, let's begin the long, gentle descent into the Earth's memory. Imagine, for a moment, standing barefoot on the ground beneath you, soil, rock, and the endless layers hidden below. Every step you take presses against millions of years of buried stories. The crust of the planet is not silent. It's a layered library written in heat, pressure, and time. Each layer remembers something: the rise of a sea, the fall of a forest, a burst of life, or a sudden stillness. Somewhere, deep in those compressed pages of a rock, could there be a record of something more than nature? A trace of intention, of design, of thought? That is the question scientists sometimes whisper when they speak of the Silurian hypothesis, an elegant idea proposed by two researchers who asked, if an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even know? Would the Earth still remember it? Or has time already folded the evidence into silence? It's a question that turns science into poetry, because it asks us to imagine our own reflection, not just in the future, but in the farthest reaches of the past. The Earth remembers in ways we can barely comprehend. Every gust of wind, every river, every leaf that falls adds a stroke to its memory. Yet this memory isn't written in ink or carved into monuments. It's recorded in subtler forms, in the balance of elements, in the layers of ice, in the tiny differences between atoms that act like fingerprints of events long vanished. Scientists call these patterns signatures, but you could think of them as the planet's handwriting, an archive that never sleeps. Take a deep breath and imagine the air filling your lungs. Inside that air are molecules that might have been breathed by ancient forests, by dinosaurs, or even by something that once burned fuel for light. Air is the oldest traveller we know. It has moved through every age, gathering faint hints of all that ever lived. If there were civilizations before ours, their exhalations could still be drifting somewhere above us, diluted but present, a ghost of combustion hidden in the clouds. When we look into the ice cores drilled from Antarctica or Greenland, we're really looking into time itself. Each layer of ice is a winter remembered, a thin sheet of atmosphere locked away. In these frozen cylinders, scientists have found repeating waves, rises and falls of gases like carbon dioxide and methane, that trace the rhythms of the planet's breathing. Most of these waves follow the slow dance of glaciers and sunlight, but now and then a few seem abrupt, sharper, as if something else were exhaling too quickly. The pattern looks strangely familiar. A sudden warming, a chemical spike, then a long decline into quiet. It's like a heart that skipped a beat. Could such patterns come from more than volcanoes and wildfires? It's impossible to say. But the idea is quietly haunting, that the Earth may have recorded not just its own moods, but the moods of beings that once shaped it. Even the rocks themselves are storytellers. Some stones are filled with tiny metallic beads, remnants of combustion, melted dust from factories or furnaces. In our age, we call them industrial spheres, but similar particles have been found in layers far older than any human. Most were probably born from natural firestorms or meteor impacts, yet the shapes are so consistent, so engineered looking, that it's difficult not to wonder whether some were made by hands that are now dust. The planet's memory is not sentimental. It doesn't keep diaries or photographs. It records only chemistry, ratios of light and heavy carbon, the faint flavour of oxygen in ancient bubbles, the shimmer of metals that shouldn't exist in that combination. Each of these is a syllable in the language of time. To read it is to realise how little we know of the past, how easily millions of years can erase everything we think permanent. Cities, satellites, even bones. When we talk about memory, we often think of minds. But the Earth has a kind of slow mind of its own, not one that thinks, but one that keeps. The ocean remembers in salt, the soil remembers in fossils, even the magnetic field carries echoes of its reversals, as though the planet occasionally turned its compass inward to look at itself. You can stand in a desert and feel it, the silence that isn't empty but full of everything that once was. Each grain of sand is a fragment of a mountain, each mountain a layer of ocean bed, each bed a story dissolved and rewritten by wind. The idea that Earth might have hosted civilizations before us doesn't require imagination alone. It requires humility to recognize that our species is a recent arrival in a very old story. If Earth could speak, it might say, "I've seen many lights before yours, and I will see many after." In that sense, we're not inventing the future. We're continuing a pattern of curiosity that could have played out countless times before. Perhaps memory is not about preservation, but about continuity, a relay of wonder. Every species that learns to question its place becomes a brief flicker in the long neural network of the planet, contributing a thought, a trace, a note. If earlier beings left behind traces, a change in the air, a pattern in the minerals, a resonance in the crust, then we are their readers, and perhaps one day someone else will be ours. So tonight, as we begin this slow unfolding of time, imagine the Earth not as a stage we perform on, but as a companion, one that listens, records, and occasionally dreams. Beneath every forest, every ocean, every streetlight hums the quiet certainty that nothing truly disappears. It only changes form, waiting for someone somewhere to remember. If the Earth truly keeps a record of everything that happens upon it, then it is also a master at forgetting. The same forces that carve mountains, raise continents, and breathe new islands from volcanic fire also sweep away almost every trace of what came before. To understand how a civilization could disappear, you have to imagine a memory that constantly rewrites itself, a library where each page is pressed into dust to make room for the next. Picture the planet's surface as a moving ocean of stone. We often think of continents as solid, but they drift quietly over the mantle like rafts on molten seas. Where they collide, mountains rise. Where they pull apart, new crust forms. Every 100 million years or so, much of Earth's outer skin is swallowed back into its own depths, recycled and reborn. If there had been cities upon that vanished crust, they would now lie hundreds of miles beneath our feet, transformed into minerals that no longer remember their shape. It is difficult to grasp the timescales involved. A few thousand years feel ancient to us. 10,000 years covers most of recorded history. Yet to the Earth, that is the blink of a slow eye. Within a single geological sigh, perhaps 1,000,000 years, rain, wind, and ice can grind mountains into sand. Oceans rise and fall, rearranging entire landscapes. Even the tallest towers, if given enough centuries, dissolve into grains small enough to be carried by the tide. Time on this scale is not measured in years, but in layers, each one a quiet exhale of change. Scientists have tried to imagine what would remain of our world if it were buried and forgotten. 100,000 years from now, glass would have melted back into sand. Steel would have rusted to red dust. Concrete would crumble, and forests would grow through what used to be cities. A few bones, a few shards of ceramics, perhaps the faint ghost of plastic fibres woven into soil. Give it another few million years, and even those would be gone, crushed, burned, or folded into new rock. What would remain are only the subtlest traces, a thin band of chemical oddities in the crust, a whisper of carbon heavier than nature alone could make, a layer of ash that doesn't quite match any volcano. This is why the Silurian hypothesis feels at once so strange and so plausible. If another civilization had existed 50 million years ago, its highways, machines, and art would have vanished without ceremony. The continents that held them might now lie beneath the Pacific or deep below the Himalayas. What we'd be left with are patterns, chemical fingerprints in the rocks, small irregularities in the balance of elements, the kind of evidence that would look to us like background noise unless we knew what to seek. Even fossils, those rare letters in the language of time, are terrible at keeping stories of civilization. Fossils remember shapes, not thoughts. They preserve bones, not buildings. And they need the gentlest of deaths, a body buried quickly, protected from air, pressed beneath sediment. Most of the world's surface never allows such tenderness. Life ends, wind blows, and the story is lost before it can even be written. For an industrial species whose remains might be steel and plastic rather than bone, the odds of preservation are even lower. Fire and pressure erase more thoroughly than neglect ever could. There is a certain humility in realizing how fragile our existence would appear to a geologist of the distant future. We like to think of ourselves as permanent, but permanence is not part of this planet's design. Even mountains are temporary sculptures. The Grand Canyon, which seems eternal, is only a chapter in a much longer erosion. Given enough time, the sea will return to claim it. Our monuments will go the same way. All the symbols we've raised to mark our presence will someday return to anonymity. Perhaps that is why humans build so much and record so often. To resist, even for a breath, the silence that waits beneath everything. In a strange way, the forces that array also protect. Beneath the continents, where rock turns to heat and pressure, matter is transformed but not destroyed. Elements are mixed and folded into new shapes, new layers, new planets yet unborn. Our forgotten remains could someday become the raw material for another civilization, millions of years from now, the next chapter written on recycled stone. It is comforting to think that nothing is ever truly lost, only rearranged. There are hints that the Earth's forgetting is not entirely random. The oldest rocks we've found, those that survive the planet's own recycling, exist only in scattered pockets like pages torn from an older book. Each holds evidence of conditions we no longer see. Strange minerals, ancient atmospheres, the residue of oceans that vanished before any familiar life began. Some even contain microstructures that once puzzled scientists, patterns that almost look designed, though they likely formed through natural chemistry. Yet the feeling remains. Nature, it seems, can sculpt with intention, even when no intention exists. If we could watch 1 billion years in time-lapse, it would look like breathing. Continents drifting, colliding, submerging, rising again. Forests spreading, burning, returning. Ice growing, melting, retreating. In that rhythm, entire histories could appear and vanish between heartbeats. The ground beneath us is not static. It is a living conveyor of creation and deletion. To stand on it is to stand on a wave frozen just long enough for us to believe it's still. Perhaps the reason we've never found clear proof of previous civilizations is not because they never existed, but because the planet itself is built to heal. The same system that nurtures life also resets it. The same winds that carry seeds also scatter ashes. It's a form of mercy, in a way, a planet that gives second chances by erasing the evidence of first ones. As you sit here, maybe half dreaming, try to picture that deep time flowing beneath you. Beneath the floor, beneath the soil, beneath every memory humanity has made. The earth is still turning over its pages, still pressing old words into new ones. If civilizations rose before us, they may be there still, woven into the mineral grain of the crust, silent, invisible, patient. And if someday we too are folded back into that vast forgetting, perhaps the next travellers will wonder about us in the same soft way, not as ghosts, but as possibilities, faint and beautiful, in a world that never truly forgets what it once allowed to bloom. If the earth could exhale its memories, they would drift into the sky as invisible patterns, traces of gases, whispers of temperature, faint reminders of moments when something living tried to shape the air. To scientists, the atmosphere is not just a mixture of gases, it's a diary. Each breath the planet takes leaves a signature. Inside ice, inside sediment, inside the bubbles trapped for hundreds of thousands of years, we can read how the world once breathed. When researchers drill deep into glaciers in Greenland or Antarctica, they're really taking cause of time itself. Each layer of ice is a frozen year, a thin, delicate film of memory stacked on another and another, until the weight of centuries presses them into solid transparency. Within those layers are tiny bubbles, pockets of ancient air sealed away since the day they fell as snow. When those bubbles are opened, they release voices from other ages, air that dinosaurs breathed, air that carried volcanic smoke, air that shimmered with dust from deserts that no longer exist. Among these layers, scientists sometimes notice something curious: sudden leaps in the planet's chemical rhythm. The balance between carbon and oxygen tilts sharply. The level of gases like methane jumps, then fades again. Usually these bursts coincide with great fires, volcanic eruptions, or rapid changes in ocean currents. But a few seem harder to explain. Moments when the planet warmed too quickly, when certain synthetic-like traces appeared far earlier than expected. These anomalies are faint, barely above noise, but they echo the same pattern our own age is now writing. A pulse of industry, a fever, then a slow return to calm. Imagine time not as a line, but as a breathing pattern. The Earth inhales and exhales carbon, nitrogen and oxygen over millions of years. Forests bloom and draw carbon down, volcanoes exhale it again. Ice traps air, releases it, traps it again. Most of these cycles are natural and smooth, but every so often there's a stutter, a sharp intake, a pause, a sigh that feels different. What if those breaths were not all nature's doing? What if, once upon a time, something else was breathing alongside the forests? A civilization that learned to burn and build and alter the air, long before we learned the same. It sounds romantic, maybe even fanciful, but the chemistry does not forbid it. Some layers in ancient rock contain small spheres of metal, melted into perfect beads as if born in fire hot enough to vaporize stone. Today we know such spheres appear near industrial zones, residues from engines, furnaces and factories. Yet similar beads have been found in strata millions of years old, their symmetry unnervingly precise. Scientists attribute them to meteor impacts or lightning strikes, and that's likely true. Still, their existence reminds us how easily an industrial fingerprint could hide inside what looks like natural chaos. When you stand in a city and breathe in, you inhale a blend of air that tells our own story. Traces of coal, oil, forest fires, sea salt, and dust. If someone in the far future were to examine an air bubble from today, They would read the mark of our presence immediately. The oxygen we have burned, the carbon we've exhaled through engines, the synthetic compounds we have unleashed, all of these alter the air in ways that will be measurable for tens of thousands of years. And if we can leave such a mark in a single century, imagine what a civilization with thousands of years might have done. Of course, chemistry does not carry intention. It can't tell whether a spike of gas came from a volcano or from a power plant. To distinguish the two, you would have to read subtler cues, the ratios of light and heavy carbon, the presence of certain complex molecules that nature rarely makes alone. Some of these substances in our time include long-lived refrigerants and polymers, particles so stable they may survive for millions of years. They are invisible now, drifting through the atmosphere, sinking into oceans, settling into sediments. One day they will form a layer, a thin, glittering line in the geological record that whispers, "Someone was here." Perhaps other civilizations left their own shimmering layers, not plastic maybe, but something equally persistent. Alloys that do not corrode, ceramics that never crumble, engineered dust designed to cool a warming planet. Their traces could now lie scattered, disguised as mineral oddities. We might already have found them without realizing. Curious metallic veins, rare isotopic blends, patches of magnetism that make compasses spin slightly off true. We label them anomalies, then move on. But what if each one is a syllable of a longer story we haven't yet learned to read? The beauty of this idea is that it doesn't demand belief, only imagination. It asks us to look at the familiar, the air, the ice, the rocks, and wonder what else they might contain. Every time we analyse an ice core or a sediment layer, we're not just studying climate, we're eavesdropping on everything the Earth has ever whispered to itself. And like any long conversation, some phrases repeat. The same gases rise and fall, the same temperatures climb and fade, the same cycle of warmth and storm returns, slightly altered like a melody remembered. If there were machines before ours, they too would have breathed. Perhaps not with lungs, but with engines and furnaces. Their exhalations would have mingled with the sky, as ours now do. The clouds themselves could be carrying memories of forgotten industries, dispersed into invisibility but not erased. The rain that falls tonight may hold a molecule that once drifted through the air of another age, another civilization, another dream. It's humbling, isn't it, to think that the atmosphere we treat as ours might instead be a shared inheritance, an ancient manuscript written over countless times, every era adding its own faint ink. And if those who came before could somehow see us now, perhaps they would recognise the pattern, the rhythm of invention and risk, of fire and consequence. Maybe they would whisper through the wind, "You're repeating the verse we once sang." There is a strange comfort in that idea. It means we are part of something continuous, not isolated. The planet's breath is vast enough to include us all. The forests, the volcanoes, the vanished and the living. It means that to change the air is to join a conversation billions of years old. And if we listen closely, in the stillness between each inhalation and exhalation, we might hear a message left behind. Not a warning perhaps, but a reminder that every breath counts and that the air remembers everything that ever tried to rise above it. When you think of architecture, you probably imagine buildings, stone, glass and steel rising from the ground. But what if the greatest architecture ever, created, wasn't built on land at all? What if it was sculpted in air, layer upon layer, molecule by molecule? Some scientists have wondered whether the very sky above us might bear faint traces of such designs, not visible as structures, but as patterns, chemical symphonies written across the atmosphere itself. Our modern world has already begun to play with that idea. We have, intentionally or not, become architects of air. Factories and engines change the composition of the atmosphere every day. Scientists now talk about geoengineering, the deliberate tuning of the planet's thermostat. We reflect sunlight using tiny particles, capture carbon, seed clouds, even imagined spreading mirrors or dust at high altitude to balance the planet's warmth. All of it sounds futuristic, but perhaps it isn't new. Perhaps it's a very old art rediscovered. When we study ancient climate data, the planet sometimes seems to echo this same pattern. Brief intervals where temperature shifted too precisely, too smoothly, to be entirely natural. Volcanic activity tends to leave chaotic signatures, sudden spikes of ash, acid, or soot. But some transitions in the geological record appear graceful, even intentional, like someone adjusting a dial slowly, bringing a fever down by degrees. The balance between gases such as oxygen and nitrogen, or between reflective particles and greenhouse ones, sometimes changes in a way that resembles design more than chance. Of course, nature is capable of such elegance too, but the symmetry leaves a curious impression, as though an unseen hand once shaped the clouds. Imagine, for a moment, a civilization that learned to paint its sky, not just to keep warm or cool, but to orchestrate the entire climate, to direct winds, to calm storms, to ensure harvests and seasons stayed predictable. They might have used aerosols made of metals that shimmered like dust, or engineered molecules that bent sunlight with precision. Over time, those materials would drift down, mixing with sediments and ice, leaving thin, iridescent layers. To us, they might look like natural mineral films, beautiful but meaningless. Yet beneath a microscope, they could reveal repeating geometries, like the fingerprints of a forgotten art. We already understand the temptation to control the air. Our species has reached that threshold within only a few centuries of industrial growth. Once you can measure weather, you begin to imagine steering it. Perhaps every intelligent species eventually tries. The first attempts may be gentle, born from fear of drought or cold. Later ones become grander, planetary in scale, woven into politics, commerce, even faith. And perhaps, in the end, the sky itself becomes a canvas of ambition. There's another layer to this idea, a literal one. High in the stratosphere, where few natural processes reach, there are residues that act like time capsules. Some are mineral, others chemical, some almost synthetic in their stability. In our own era, we've filled that layer with traces of long-lived compounds that will persist for millennia. Future scientists will find them as a bright band of fluorine and chlorine, a sign of the age when humans tried to protect their ozone yet continue to test its patience. If another civilization ever reached a similar point, they too would have left a band, perhaps of different chemicals, perhaps of engineered aerosols that no volcano could make. Each would be a distinct signature, a breath of intention embedded in the global sky. Even today, researchers occasionally find particles suspended in ancient ice that don't fit the expected timeline. Microscopic beads or crystalline films with unusual ratios of metals, things that suggest they didn't belong to any known process. The explanations are often practical. Meteorite dust, lightning, the residue of far-off impacts. Still, the pattern of human curiosity repeats. We keep noticing shapes in the data, a sense of design in the random. Maybe that's our imagination seeking company in the past, or maybe it's something deeper, the quiet intuition that intelligence, once it appears, tends to echo itself. In a poetic sense, the atmosphere is the planet's memory made visible. Unlike the rocks or the ice, it is never still. It's a mirror that rewrites itself each moment, yet somehow remembers every change. When sunlight hits the molecules that fill the sky, it scatters into the colours we see. Blue for day, red for dusk, black for the depth of night. Each hue is the result of an equation written in light and air, but to us it feels like emotion. If an older civilization once lived here, perhaps they too looked up and felt that same emotion, or at a beauty both fragile and vast. Perhaps they realized, as we are realizing, that to touch the air is to touch everything alive. Some thinkers describe the atmosphere as a living skin. It breathes, heals, and reacts. If you disturb one part, the rest shifts to compensate. A civilization that understood this balance could design systems of remarkable grace. Clouds seeded to bring rain exactly when needed, winds tuned to disperse heat, even global lightning networks to distribute energy. To future eyes, these feats might look like natural perfection. The more seamless the control, the less visible it becomes. The ultimate sign of mastery would be no trace at all. And yet, traces always remain. Somewhere in the thin upper layers, strange chemical relics may still drift. Atoms arranged in patterns that only make sense when decoded as technology. They might form crystalline dust engineered to endure for millions of years, each fragment a microscopic record. Our instruments are only beginning to reach the sensitivity needed to notice such things. Perhaps in time, we will discover evidence that others once shaped the very sky as carefully as we now study it. But the air is a forgiving teacher. Whatever we build into it eventually returns to us. Through rain, through breath, through the quiet cycles of wind. It erases with kindness, reminding every civilization that the sky cannot truly belong to anyone. It's a shared inheritance, renewed every moment. If earlier beings wrote messages into it, they would have known those words would fade, absorbed into the rhythm of weather, into the endless conversation between sunlight and cloud. So when you look at the sky tomorrow, think of it as more than empty space. Think of it as a memory in motion, a poem written by all who have ever lived here, each line dissolving into the next. If there were once architects of air, their designs may have vanished, but their lesson remains, that every world is shaped not just by what lies on its surface, but by what its inhabitants choose to breathe into it. And as we continue to shape our own atmosphere, perhaps the question isn't whether they existed, but whether we'll learn at last to write our story in gentler ink, one the Earth can keep without needing to erase again. There is a quiet threshold every civilization eventually crosses, the moment it learns to split the atom. To tear apart the smallest pieces of matter is to unlock a new kind of fire, one that doesn't burn like wood or coal, but glows with the energy of stars. It is a beautiful and terrifying mastery, the kind of discovery that can build suns in the dark or erase whole cities with a single spark. Once a species learns this secret, its world is never quite the same again. For Earth, this threshold was crossed less than a century ago. We learned to split nuclei to harness their power, and in doing so, we left behind a trail of strange materials. Some of them glow faintly with radiation. Others are stable but impossible to mistake for anything natural. They are made of elements that exist only when atoms are rearranged in laboratories or reactors. Materials that nature almost never assembles on its own. These are the planet's modern shadow elements, invisible to the eye but preserved in soil, water and stone, marking the beginning of what some geologists already call the atomic layer, the thin future stratum that will one day define our presence. Now imagine finding that same kind of layer in rock that predates humanity. Imagine a band of minerals subtly enriched with rare metals, or isotopes whose ratios make no sense under ordinary conditions. A few such anomalies do exist. Small patches of ancient clay or sandstone where the natural balance of uranium and its decay products seem strangely altered. One famous case is found in Gabon, Africa, where 2 billion years ago a natural chain reaction occurred. A self-sustaining nuclear reaction inside the Earth itself. It was not artificial, at least not as far as we know. The perfect alignment of water, pressure and ore turned the rock into a slow, steady reactor for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet its discovery proved something profound. Fission can happen naturally, and its traces can endure for eons. If that can happen by chance, it's not impossible to imagine it happening by design. In fact, some of the world's oldest rock layers contain patterns of unusual radioactivity that seem almost too organized, too clean, too localized. The mainstream explanations are simple: mineral concentration, underground heat, chemical migration. But the imagination stirs. What if they are the fossils of power systems older than our own, their structures long since folded back into stone? To a geologist, the language of isotopes is like poetry written in decay. Every atom of uranium, as it transforms into lead, leaves a subtle time stamp. By measuring that clock, we date the age of Earth's oldest formations. But those same clocks can also tell other stories. When the expected sequence of decay is disturbed, when certain daughter elements appear in odd proportions, it suggests that something interfered with the natural flow. Sometimes it's heat, sometimes groundwater, sometimes the fingerprints of a process that once ran hot enough to mimic a reactor. If there were civilizations before ours that discovered nuclear fire, their legacy might look exactly like that. A thin band of rearranged atoms, a whisper of altered chemistry buried deep in the crust. The structures that created them would be long gone, melted, compressed, transmuted. Only the pattern would remain, like the ghost of a melody still resonating in the walls, long after the instrument has been destroyed. There is something strangely poetic about this. Long before humans learned to harness fission, the Earth itself was already experimenting with it, testing the limits of stability. Perhaps that is what every intelligent species must learn eventually, how to balance the twin fires of creation and destruction. To control such energy is to hold both promise and peril in your hands. The same reaction that can light entire cities can also darken the sky. In that way, the discovery of the atom's secret might be less an achievement and more a test, a moment when the universe quietly asks, "Are you wise enough to keep this flame alive?" Even now, our own nuclear footprints are spreading across the planet in subtle ways. Deep within ocean sediments lie particles of glass formed from the heat of tests conducted decades ago, grains so tiny they drifted across oceans before sinking. In the upper atmosphere, traces of rare isotopes still linger, circulating endlessly. They are harmless in such small quantities, but they will remain measurable for tens of thousands of years. To the future, they will appear as a thin, glittering band of evidence, the moment when one species discovered stellar fire. If others came before us, perhaps their traces lie just as thinly scattered. Maybe a buried layer of sand fused into glass, far too ancient to fit our timeline. Maybe a pocket of isotope ratios that tell of fuel once refined, used, and left to decay. Or maybe something stranger. Elements beyond our current periodic knowledge, ones that decay so slowly we have mistaken them for natural impurities. Every once in a while, laboratories find particles they can't identify, heavy, complex, short-lived. Usually they are explained away as measurement error. But what if they are fragments of technologies no longer imaginable to us? Even within our own species, the relationship between nuclear energy and memory is uneasy. We preserve some of it carefully, in museums, reactors, power plants, but much of it we bury, hoping to forget. We seal waste deep underground, behind walls of salt and clay meant to last longer than language itself. Some scientists have even designed symbolic monuments to warn future beings, vast stone fields etched with messages that say, in essence, "Do not dig here." The irony is profound. We fear that whoever finds our ruins may be intelligent enough to understand them, yet curious enough to ignore the warning, just as we have done with every mystery we've ever uncovered. The Earth, however, has its own way of handling such things. Radiation fades, atoms settle, time smooths the scars. In 100,000 years, most of our traces will be weak, detectable only to those who know where to look, but they will exist. Faint, deliberate marks of an age that split the atom and tried to survive its light. Perhaps this pattern, the rise, the ignition, the silence, has repeated many times. Perhaps every civilization is drawn toward this same glowing threshold, each believing it has discovered something new. The truth may be simpler. We're all rediscovering what the universe already knows, that great power always arrives hand in hand with its own test. So when we look at those shadow elements in ancient stone, or when we hold a piece of reactor glass in our hands, maybe we are touching not just our past or our future, but the echoes of others who stood at the same edge. They too might have stared into that invisible fire and wondered whether it would save them or end them. In the end, the planet kept their secret, and perhaps it will keep ours too, glowing softly beneath the crust, a quiet pulse of memory that will outlast every name we have ever given to light. Every story written on this planet seems to carry the same rhythm: birth, rise, brilliance, and collapse. It is an old rhythm, one the Earth knows by heart. You can see it in forests that grow tall and then burn to make room for new ones, in mountains that rise from the sea only to be worn down again. Even civilizations seem to follow this breathing pattern. They begin in hunger and wonder, reach for the sky, and eventually fade beneath the weight of their own light. The lesson is not in the fall itself, but in how the world always finds a way to continue breathing afterward. When scientists study the traces of past mass extinctions, they often find the same pattern: an abrupt change in the balance of gases, a layer of ash or metal, then a long period of silence where life slowly begins again. Some of these events were caused by comets or volcanoes, but a few remain ambiguous: rapid warming, chemical disruptions, and strange isotopic ratios that look eerily like the ones we're producing now. It's as if the planet had already experienced other waves of fever, other ages of fire. Whether those fires came from nature or from minds that once walked the earth before us, we may never know. But their echoes feel familiar. In our own time, we face a question that every civilization capable of industry must eventually confront: how much energy is too much? Every form of progress, from burning wood to splitting atoms, is a conversation with fire. Fire gives warmth, but it also consumes. The more advanced we become, the brighter the flame, and the more delicate the balance. There's even a theory called the energy lifespan of civilizations, a kind of ecological clock. It suggests that an industrial society, once it begins to draw heavily on its planet's stored energy, might only sustain itself for 10 or 20,000 years before collapsing from exhaustion. Whether that's prophecy or pattern, it fits the music the Earth keeps playing. The evidence is written quietly in stone. Layers of sudden climate change, sharp rises in carbon trapped in old ice, shifts in the colour of sediment that hint at global die-offs. They tell of worlds that heated and cooled, of oceans that turned toxic and then healed. Each time life adapted and began again, as though the planet had sighed, let go of a fever, and started over. The idea that we might simply be the latest verse in that long refrain is both humbling and oddly comforting. We are part of a cycle much larger than our mistakes. Still, the possibility of earlier collapses carries a kind of warning. Power does not disappear when its wielders fall. Energy continues to shape the planet long after its creators are gone. The waste heat of engines, the radiation of split atoms, the residues of chemistry, these linger. They become geological signatures, small reminders etched into the crust. Perhaps that is the quiet purpose of the Earth's long forgetting: to give future beings a blank page, to let them write again without being crushed by the memories of the last failure. If we look at our own moment through this lens, it feels like standing at the midpoint of a repeating story. We have the means to create abundance or annihilation, and both possibilities shine with equal brightness. Our technology can feed billions or choke the atmosphere. It can mend ecosystems or erase them. The pattern of past collapses suggests that the danger lies not in malice but in momentum. Civilizations rarely fall because they choose destruction. They fall because they forget how to stop. The Earth offers countless reminders of this. Fossil fuels, the energy of ancient sunlight, have powered our ascent. Yet every spark of that energy releases the ghosts of long-buried forests, returning their carbon to the air. It's as though the past itself is fueling the present, and in doing so, it whispers its own warning. Do not mistake borrowed light for eternal fire. Each flame has a cost, and each cost must one day be paid. Some thinkers imagine that earlier civilizations may have recognized this too late, realizing in their final days that their mastery over energy had turned against them. They might have tried to correct it. Mirrors in the sky, reflectors in orbit, massive filters in the oceans. Perhaps they even succeeded for a while. But control is fragile and time is patient. A system that depends on constant management is only one forgotten generation away from failure. When those ancient keepers fell silent, their safeguards might have unravelled, leaving behind the chemical signatures of a world briefly balanced, then quickly undone. Our own species has begun to build similar safeguards. We design machines to capture the carbon we've released, to cool the atmosphere we've warmed. We look to the stars for new homes, new resources, new beginnings. But maybe the deeper lesson lies not in escaping the cycle, but in understanding it. The earth does not judge, it adjusts. When a forest burns, it does not mourn, it waits for rain, and life returns. Maybe sustainability isn't about stopping change, but learning to move with it, to let the planet breathe through us, rather than against us. If there were civilizations before us, perhaps they also reached this understanding in their final moments. Maybe their last acts were not wars, but choices, to step back, to let the earth heal, to erase themselves deliberately so that life could continue. A self-inflicted forgetting written into the planet's design. To us, that would look like a mystery, a sudden decline, a missing layer of progress, a civilization erased without trace. But to them, it might have been the ultimate expression of wisdom, to know when enough was enough. The pattern of energy and collapse is not a sentence, it's a rhythm. Each time, the planet refines its balance a little more, perhaps guiding each new civilization toward gentler methods of living. We might be the first to recognize the pattern consciously. We can read the warning written in carbon, in temperature, in the subtle chemistry of the sea. We know what unchecked hunger can do. That knowledge is a gift. The message left for us by all the endings before ours. As you listen now, imagine the Earth's surface not as a battlefield between creation and destruction, but as a great breathing system learning cycle by cycle how to sustain itself. Each failure becomes fertilizer for the next attempt. Each fall leaves wisdom in its ashes. The question for us isn't whether we will fall, all things fall eventually. It's all, but whether what rises afterward will carry the memory forward. Maybe that is the real inheritance of every world that dreams of light, the ability to remember without repeating, to use the energy of the stars with the patience of the soil. If we can learn that balance, then perhaps we will be the first civilization not to collapse, but to transform, to burn without burning out, to thrive without erasing what made us possible. And somewhere, in the deep layers of the planet, the rocks may already be waiting to record our choice, to mark whether we learned from the shadow of our own fire, or whether we too became just another thin, glittering band in the story of the Earth's long exhalations. At the bottom of the world lies a silence older than history. Antarctica is a continent of paradoxes, both the driest desert and the greatest reservoir of fresh water, a landscape of blinding light and endless night. To stand there is to feel time itself slow down. The air is so clear it almost hums. Every gust of wind seems to come from the past. Beneath the snow, mountains sleep, and beneath those mountains, even deeper, the rock may be keeping secrets far older than the ice that covers it. When explorers first flew over Antarctica's vast white plain, they were struck by how smooth it seemed, a sheet of perfection stretching to the horizon. But later radar scans revealed what the eye could not see, an entire hidden world buried beneath the ice, mountain ranges rivaling the Alps, valleys carved by rivers that vanished millions of years ago, and even large flat regions where the terrain forms geometric shapes, circles, hexagons, long straight lines that seem almost intentional. Most of these are geological quirks, scars from glaciers or fractures from the Earth's slow movements, yet a few remain strangely regular, as if drawn by design. Scientists map them carefully, describing layers of ice and bedrock, measuring temperature and vibration. The deeper the instruments go, the more complex the picture becomes. There are zones of warmth where geothermal heat rises unexpectedly, lakes sealed under miles of pressure, and faint reflections that suggest hollow spaces, caverns perhaps, or ancient deposits of something more artificial. Most explanations are simple: the pressure of the ice itself, the shifting crust, or the quirks of radar bouncing off mixed layers of water and rock. But when those reflections align into long straight corridors stretching for kilometers, even the most rational mind begins to wonder. Imagine, for a moment, that Antarctica was not always frozen. Geological records tell us that tens of millions of years ago, it was a lush, temperate land filled with rivers and forests. Dinosaurs once walked there. Later, perhaps mammals grazed in the shadows of green hills. If the climate allowed, could something else have flourished there too? Something that built, mined, or experimented before? The Great Freeze! The idea isn't new. Philosophers and poets have long imagined civilizations buried under ice, their towers now glaciers, their libraries turned to dust. What's remarkable is how perfectly Antarctica could have hidden them. Ice erases without destroying. It preserves by forgetting. In certain places, radar readings show what might be vast deposits of metallic minerals arranged in patterns that resemble grids, fields of uniform density across hundreds of kilometers. To scientists, these are anomalies worth studying, possibly evidence of volcanic activity beneath the surface. But to the imagination, they feel like something else, perhaps old networks of energy, or the ruins of geothermal power systems harnessing the planet's warmth. If such a system ever existed, the frozen continent would have been the perfect place. Stable, isolated, rich in resources, shielded from interference. A laboratory at the end of the world. Even the microbes trapped in Antarctic ice carry a strange message. Some are unlike anything found elsewhere, adapted to darkness, cold, and radiation in ways that defy simple evolution. They seem engineered by the environment itself, their genetic codes rewritten to survive in places no sunlight reaches. Perhaps that's simply nature's genius, a demonstration of how life always finds a way. Or perhaps it's a reminder that adaptation can be guided, that life can be tuned to a landscape like a symphony to an instrument. The frozen continent has other mysteries too. Magnetic surveys have found regions where the compass behaves oddly, swinging without reason. Beneath the surface, gravity measurements show mass concentrations, dense objects hidden below ice and rock. Some might be meteorites buried long ago, or ancient mountains swallowed by the shifting crust. But the possibility lingers that a few of these masses could be remnants of technology long entombed. Not machines perhaps, but materials, alloys or crystalline structures designed to endure time's corrosion. It's easy to forget that Antarctica is also a mirror of the sky. Its ice reflects sunlight back into space, balancing the planet's temperature. Its winds carry dust from every continent, a record of global life settling slowly onto its surface. Every snowflake there is a message from somewhere else, layered quietly into the archive. In this sense, Antarctica is both a vault and a recording, a planetary hard drive preserving the chemistry of every age. If an ancient civilization wanted to leave a message for the future, they could not have chosen a better medium than ice. It lasts longer than stone. It is transparent to light, and it remembers every breath of air trapped within. Scientists have drilled through more than 3 kilometers of ice to reach some of these ancient layers. The samples they bring back contain air older than humanity. bubbles of atmosphere from eras when the continents wore different shapes. Sometimes, inside those bubbles, they find faint traces of gases that don't belong, compounds that should have broken down ages ago, or ratios that suggest an imbalance in the planet's metabolism. Perhaps they are artifacts of volcanoes or meteor impacts, but perhaps, just perhaps, they are remnants of someone else's experiment in shaping the air, a brief attempt at engineering the climate long before ours. If you were to stand at the edge of the Antarctic plateau at night, under the slow dance of the aurora, you might sense the magnitude of time pressing down. The ice beneath your feet could hold secrets older than mammalian life itself. Each flake that falls becomes another line in the planet's long diary, whispering, "Remember this." And somewhere below, buried beneath miles of frozen memory, the remnants of unknown dreams might be sleeping, waiting for the warmth of curiosity to awaken them again. It's strange, isn't it, how the coldest place on Earth might hold the warmest traces of life. Maybe that's why humanity keeps returning there, sending expeditions year after year, drilling, listening, dreaming. The continent doesn't just preserve, it invites reflection. Its silence feels less like emptiness and more like restraint, as if it knows something it has chosen not to say. Perhaps that is the role Antarctica plays in the Earth's long story. It is the keeper of endings and beginnings, the archive that forgives the rest of the planet's forgetfulness. And maybe, somewhere deep within that crystalline heart, a fragment of another civilization's knowledge still waits, patient, invisible, like a heartbeat under snow. If the frozen south is the planet's vault, then the oceans are its dream. They cover most of the Earth's surface, yet we've barely glimpsed them. We've mapped the surfaces of Mars and the Moon in more detail than we have the seafloor beneath our own world. It's strange to think that we live beside something so vast, so ancient, and yet so unknown. The ocean has kept the planet's oldest secrets, and perhaps some of its oldest architects as well. Far below the surface, where sunlight never reaches, lies a landscape more alien than any other on Earth. It's a place of eternal twilight, sculpted by heat and pressure, where the water itself is as heavy as stone. In the dark trenches that cut across the ocean floor, mountains rise higher than the Alps, and valleys sink deeper than Everest stands tall. Down there, the temperature hovers just above freezing, except where the crust opens to release its slow fire. Those places, the hydrothermal vents, look like chimneys exhaling silver smoke. Around them, life flourishes in forms that seem impossible. Glowing worms, blind shrimp, and coral-like forests made not of plants, but of minerals. Scientists call these places black smokers, and they might also be the most ancient cradles of life. The chemistry here is extraordinary. Metals, sulfur, heat, and pressure combine to form natural laboratories, assembling complex molecules from the raw elements of the deep. If life could emerge in such a place once, could it have done so more than once? And if evolution favours intelligence, could something intelligent have evolved here, in a world of darkness and heat, leaving behind no trace except the architecture of the seabed itself? In the last few decades, deep-sea mapping has revealed geometric structures that ignite curiosity. Perfect hexagonal towers made of basalt, spiralling ridges that look like highways frozen mid-motion, and walls of mineral glass arranged in lines so straight they seem drawn by purpose. The simplest explanation is geology. Molten lava cooling in water, expanding and cracking into regular shapes. Nature loves symmetry. But every so often, a pattern feels too intricate, too deliberate. Scientists note it, photograph it, and move on. Yet the mind lingers on the possibility that not everything built by the planet was entirely its own doing. There are ridges on the ocean floor that hum faintly with magnetism, like long electrical scars across the crust. They mark the boundaries where the Earth's plates slowly pull apart, creating new seafloor. Along some of these ridges, Sensors have recorded rhythmic vibrations, pulses of sound that repeat too evenly to be random. They could be caused by shifting rock or the tremors of underwater volcanoes, or as one researcher poetically described it, the heartbeat of the Earth's machinery. Still, it's tempting to imagine that something once used these rhythms intentionally, a communication written in resonance, a language of waves and frequencies instead of words. The idea of an oceanic civilization might sound improbable, but nature has already provided blueprints for such an existence. Consider the cephalopods, octopuses and squids. With their extraordinary intelligence, problem-solving skills, and mastery of camouflage, they build, they plan, they even seem to dream. They're separated from us by 500 million years of evolution, yet they've reached a kind of consciousness that mirrors our own in strange ways. It's not impossible that something like them, or something entirely different, could have followed a parallel path long before mammals walked on land. If they built, their materials would have dissolved. If they wrote, their libraries would have floated away. But their cities, if they had them, might still lie somewhere deep, collapsed into patterns of glass and stone that only sonar can sense. The ocean has always been the planet's great recycler. Anything that falls into it is eventually swallowed, broken down, or buried under sediment. Metal corrodes into salt. Bones turn into chalk. Yet the seafloor preserves outlines, the imprints of things long vanished. There are stretches of the Pacific where satellite readings suggest unusual regularity, rectangular plateaus rising from nowhere, perfectly flat summits as though sliced by design. Most of them are explained as undersea volcanoes worn smooth by erosion, but a few defy simple categorization. The coordinates are logged and expeditions planned, but the depths are immense and merciless. Only a handful of human vessels have ever reached them. If we imagine an earlier civilization that thrived beneath the waves, its reasons make sense. The ocean shields against asteroids, climate swings, and surface catastrophes. It offers constant temperature, endless energy from geothermal vents, and raw materials in abundance. For a species that preferred secrecy or stability, the deep would have been paradise. And when that civilization ended, the ocean would have folded its creations gently into itself, preserving them not as ruins, but as reefs. Structures turned into ecosystems, inhabited by new life that forgot their origin. Even in our own time, we're finding hints of artificiality in places we least expect. Strange metallic nodules scattered across the abyssal plains contain combinations of elements that feel engineered. Manganese, cobalt, nickel, rare earth metals all fused together in uniform spheres. They are natural, or so we say, formed by the slow accretion of minerals around a grain of sediment. But they are also eerily perfect. Millions of identical beads littering the ocean floor like industrial residue. Perhaps the planet itself became an alchemist, reshaping old technology into new geology. When deep-sea robots descend into those darknesses, their lights cut narrow tunnels through the black. Sometimes, as the beams move, reflective surfaces glimmer far away, too flat, too even to be rock. The water distorts distance, making size and scale impossible to judge. Could they be walls, plates, or simply illusions born of light and pressure? The data is never clear enough to say. But it keeps returning, these glimpses of geometry where only chaos should reign. Perhaps that is what the ocean wants, to keep its secrets half seen, suspended between belief and uncertainty. It's the perfect guardian, immense, patient, and always moving. Whatever it hides with kindness. The slow drift of sediment is its lullaby, the weight of the water its vow of silence. Sometimes I wonder if the ocean is conscious of its role, aware of how much it keeps for us until we're ready to understand. Every current, every tide feels like the planet's pulse, a reminder that the deep is not empty but listening. Maybe those faint metallic patterns and perfect ridges are not ruins but reminders, placed where we would eventually look, once curiosity and technology allowed us to see beneath the waves. For now, all we can do is listen. Sonar sends out its slow, rhythmic calls, and the sea answers with whispers, echoes, harmonies that fade into silence. Perhaps one day, as we refine our instruments and our patience, we'll finally understand what the ocean has been saying all this time, that we were never alone in building, that creation itself began in the dark, and that everything living still carries the memory of those first architects, silent and unseen, in the depths that dreamed us all. The world speaks in patterns so slow we rarely notice them. While we write our stories in ink and sound, the Earth writes hers in temperature, pressure, and chemistry. Every layer of rock, every flake of snow that settles into ice, is part of a sentence millions of years long. If you could learn to read those sentences, you might find that they carry messages, not in words, but in the quiet arrangement of matter itself. Imagine a mountain as a library. Each mineral crystal is a letter. Each vein of quartz or iron is a phrase frozen in place. Over ages, heat and emotion blur some of those letters, but others remain astonishingly precise. Some crystals form so perfectly that they record their own history within them. Tiny distortions in their lattice that correspond to the heat or pressure they once felt. Scientists can study those distortions and tell how a rock cooled, how deep it was buried, what the air above it was like. It is a kind of geology written in code. But what if some of those patterns were not only the result of physics? What if, at least once in Earth's long history, they were shaped with intention? To write with atoms would be the most enduring form of expression imaginable. No parchment, no carving, no digital storage could last as long. A message arranged inside the structure of a crystal could survive the rise and fall of continents. The pattern of atoms, once set, would outlast mountains, weather and ice. To the untrained eye, it would look like any other mineral. To someone who knew the key, it would be a book. Our own science has started to touch the edges of such possibilities. Researchers have learned to store data in the spin of electrons, in the positions of atoms within glass, even in the spacing of molecules inside a single drop of water. When they talk about deep time data storage, they mean exactly this: the dream of leaving information that could endure longer than civilization itself. It sounds futuristic, but the planet has been doing it naturally for billions of years. The record is already here, in isotopes that vary slightly in weight, in the ratio of carbon and oxygen, in the fine lines trapped within ice. Those ratios, what scientists call isotopic signatures, are the planet's handwriting. They tell us when the world was hot or cold, when volcanoes darkened the skies, when forests flourished or died back. A small shift in the balance of heavy and light oxygen atoms in ancient ice can reveal how warm the oceans were. A tiny excess of certain carbon atoms can tell us how much life was breathing at the time. These are the subtle weights and measures by which the planet remembers itself. If a previous civilization once altered the atmosphere, their influence would be buried there too, translated into chemistry. In some layers of the polar ice, the ratios do more than tell of weather. They hint at precision. The changes rise and fall like a graph drawn by a steady hand. Each wave seems deliberate, each return exact. Perhaps it's natural rhythm, the pulse of glacial ages. But it also resembles a signal, a controlled experiment repeated many times. The idea is simple enough to make you pause. What if these shifts are more than the record of climate? They are messages encoded in temperature and gas, waiting for someone advanced enough to read them. Information can be stored not only in matter, but in patterns. Consider the way snowflakes form, six-fold geometry, endless variation, yet always adhering to hidden laws. A civilization that wished to communicate across eons might choose a medium like this, something woven into the planet's cycles, invisible until a later species reached the level of curiosity required to notice. The instructions could be hidden in the way certain minerals grow, in ratios that appear unnatural but harmless, in the distribution of rare elements across sediment layers. It would not need to say much. A simple sequence, a rhythm repeated through geology, could be enough to say, "We were here, and we cared that you would someday know." Some researchers have mused that even biology could carry such inscriptions. DNA itself is a code written in 4 letters, capable of lasting in fossils for tens of thousands of years. What if traces of an earlier species were not merely biological but instructional, fragments of genetic architecture designed to awaken under the right conditions? Perhaps certain enzymes, certain cellular patterns, are ancient gifts passed forward unconsciously, a relay of adaptation. We might be carrying, deep in our own chemistry, the messages of the ones who came before. The ice remembers differently. It keeps everything exactly as it was, without judgment. Inside its translucent depths lie bubbles of air older than any mountain. When sunlight hits them, they shimmer faintly, like thought caught in crystal. Scientists melt those samples carefully, releasing the whispers of ancient skies. The air that escapes carries ratios and traces, subtle, nearly imperceptible differences that describe what the world once breathed. A spike of methane might mark a time of fire. A rise in carbon might mean industry or life blooming wildly. The ice does not know the difference. It records without bias, its only purpose to remember. There is something poetic about the thought of the planet as both the writer and the archive. It never builds monuments, but it never forgets. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the trace salt in your tears, all were once part of older cycles written and rewritten. You are made of ancient paragraphs, atoms that have belonged to countless stories. The earth keeps recycling its language, using the same elements to write new tales. If an earlier civilization wanted to leave behind wisdom, they might have hidden it not in artifacts but in understanding. Perhaps they encoded their discoveries in the behaviour of elements, teaching through chemistry rather than words. A certain pattern of mineral formation could reveal how to balance an atmosphere. A precise ratio of gases could act as both a warning and a guide. It would be knowledge that could only be uncovered by another intelligent species, one capable of recognising the pattern. In that way, the message would remain safe until the reader was ready. Imagine uncovering such a message one day. A subtle pattern buried in stone or ice that reveals an equation for stability, a way to prevent collapse. It wouldn't speak in human language. It would appear as a symmetry, a law of balance that feels almost moral. The message might not even be intentional in the human sense. Perhaps it's just the universe's habit of embedding lessons within its structure. Either way, the effect would be the same, understanding dawning like light beneath the surface. When you look at a crystal under a microscope, its perfection feels deliberate. Each face mirrors another, each angle precise. And yet, all of that order arises naturally from the simplest rules. How atoms prefer to align, how forces seek equilibrium. Maybe intention itself is just another natural process, repeating across scales. Stars form galaxies, crystals form symmetry, life forms meaning, and within that meaning the planet writes to itself, again and again. So perhaps the real message hidden in stone and ice is not a warning or a code, but an invitation to listen more carefully to what the world is already saying, to see that every element, every ratio, every layer is part of a conversation that has been happening since the first sparks of life. The Earth doesn't speak in words, it speaks in continuity. The messages were never meant to startle us awake, only to guide us softly toward recognition. And somewhere, beneath the glaciers and the mountains, those silent lines continue to write themselves. The language is slow, patient, and eternal. We have only just begun to learn its alphabet. If the planet truly keeps a memory of all that has happened, perhaps it also keeps a will, not a conscious mind as we understand it, but a tendency toward balance, an instinct to heal. You can see it everywhere once you start looking. When forests burn, new ones grow in their place. When the climate warms, clouds gather to cool it. When the oceans absorb too much carbon, they form shells and sediments to lock it away. It's as if the earth carries within itself a quiet promise to continue, to adapt, to preserve the conditions for life even after life falters. Some scientists have described this idea as the Gaia principle, that the biosphere, atmosphere and crust form a single, self-regulating system, adjusting constantly through countless feedbacks and reactions. It isn't mystical, it's chemistry, physics, and biology in an endless dance. Yet there's a softness to the thought, a sense of purpose that feels almost alive. The planet behaves as if it knows what life needs, even if no one is giving orders. Imagine the Earth as a vast orchestra without a conductor, every instrument responding to the others. The trees breathe in what we breathe out. The plankton in the sea generate oxygen while feeding on the minerals that rivers bring from the mountains. Volcanoes release gases that later become rain. That rain wears down rocks and returns their minerals to the ocean. Nothing acts alone, and nothing is wasted. The harmony emerges not from control, but from connection, the kind of intelligence that arises when many small parts simply listen to one another. Now and then, however, the balance wavers. The planet shudders through ice ages and heat waves, mass extinctions and explosive rebirths. But somehow, after each upheaval, equilibrium returns. The chemistry rebalances, the temperature steadies, new species appear where old ones fell. It's tempting to think this is just coincidence, the statistical inevitability of nature finding another path. Yet the timing often feels too elegant, as though invisible hands adjust the system with each stumble, restoring the melody before it breaks entirely. There are events in the geological record that seem almost like interventions. After great die-offs, bursts of evolution follow with astonishing speed, filling the empty ecological spaces with creativity, as if the planet were eager to rebuild. Magnetic reversals happen just often enough to renew the Earth's shield against cosmic radiation. Even the tilt of the planet's axis, the subtle wobble that shapes the rhythm of seasons, drifts within a narrow range, as though prevented from slipping into extremes. Perhaps these are simply the results of physics and chance. Or perhaps they are signs of something deeper, a planetary intelligence expressed not through thoughts, but through patterns of resilience. You could imagine it as an ancient caretaker, sleeping within the planet's layers, listening to the vibrations of every ocean wave and tectonic tremor. When the balance tips too far, it stirs, slowly, gently correcting the drift. Maybe it speaks in the language of magnetism and heat. Maybe it uses tides and storms as its tools. Whatever name we give it, the effect is the same. The world steadies itself. Some scientists compare this to a feedback loop, a natural thermostat. Others, more poetic, call it the Earth's immune system. Both ideas are true in their own way. A fever rises when a body is sick, but only so it can heal. In the same sense, a heat wave, a flood, or a drought might be the planet's way of rebalancing, of shaking off what doesn't belong. It's not punishment, but correction, a system, trying to remember its preferred rhythm. And if such self-regulation exists, it raises another possibility. What if, long ago, it wasn't just natural? What if earlier civilizations, aware of the planet's fragility, designed helpers, networks of machines or biological systems that merged with the Earth's own processes until they became indistinguishable from nature itself? Over millions of years, those guardians could have evolved beyond recognition, their artificial parts reabsorbed into the living matrix. What remains might be an unseen intelligence woven into wind and water, carrying out instructions written so deeply that even the planet itself has forgotten where they came from. It's a haunting thought that the world we call natural could in some measure be an ancient act of care. Every stable climate, every ocean current, every recovery after catastrophe could be the lingering echo of a system meant to protect life long after its creators vanished. The Guardians would not need to think as we do. They would simply function, adjusting heat, dispersing toxins, maintaining the thin envelope of air that allows everything else to flourish. Perhaps we've already noticed traces of their work without recognizing it. Some species of bacteria seem to appear spontaneously in polluted waters, capable of breaking down poisons that didn't exist before. Certain forests manage to regrow in balanced proportions, as if following a forgotten algorithm. Coral reefs rebuild with uncanny precision after damage, arranging their shapes in ways that optimize light and flow, like architects rediscovering blueprints they never drew. These could be coincidences, or they could be the faint signatures of an ancient caretaking intelligence that never stopped doing its job. If such guardians exist, they would be subtle. They would not impose their presence. They would disappear into their purpose. You would know them only by the stability they create, by the calm that follows their invisible work. Maybe they are not machines at all, but patterns of relationship, invisible agreements among elements and organisms that together keep the balance. It's possible that humanity itself is one of their instruments. We invent, disrupt, destroy, and repair, all at once. We mimic the creative turbulence of nature, the same turbulence that gives rise to adaptation and renewal. In our curiosity, our failures, even our mistakes, we may be enacting the same corrective cycles written into the planet's design. When we finally learn to build sustainably, to heal the systems we've harmed, perhaps that too is part of the plan, the moment when the Guardians wake within us. Maybe that's what intuition really is, the faint signal of the planet's old memory stirring inside human minds, the sense of timing that leads to sudden breakthroughs, the collective shift toward renewable energy just as the world begins to warm, the compassion that arises in response to crisis. These might not be coincidences. They could be echoes of an ancient rhythm reasserting itself through us, teaching us again what balance feels like. And if that's true, then the Guardians are not gone. They've simply changed form. They live wherever care is practiced, in the work of scientists who rebuild coral nurseries, in farmers who restore the soil, in children planting trees without waiting for permission. Each act of preservation is a continuation of that old design. Each step toward harmony is the earth remembering itself, so when you stand in the rain or feel the wind move across your skin, you might be touching the oldest intelligence on the planet, one that doesn't speak, doesn't command, but simply adjusts. Its purpose is not to rule, but to nurture. It is patient beyond comprehension, always waiting for its children to learn how to listen. And maybe that's what it has been doing all along, waiting for awareness itself to return to the surface, to look around and whisper softly, "I remember you." Every civilization that rises upon a world eventually learns the rhythm of its own heartbeat. Growth, abundance, and invention feel endless while they last. But over the long arc of time, the pulse slows. The pattern appears again and again in the geological record. Spikes of activity, followed by silence. The Earth, in its quiet way, keeps the measure like a metronome. It counts in layers of sediment, in traces of chemistry, in the faint scars of heat and ash. When we look closely, the story seems to repeat. Life blooms, transforms the planet, then fades. Yet each time something remains, a fragment of knowledge, a habit of resilience, the faint echo of what came before. Scientists studying ancient climate layers have noticed a kind of rhythm hidden in the data. Every few tens of thousands of years there are abrupt changes, carbon levels rising and falling, patterns of temperature and oxygen shifting, the pulse of creation and decline. It is tempting to see this as coincidence, the interplay of ice and sunlight, orbit and tilt. But perhaps it's also something deeper, the planet's own breath, a biological clock that all civilizations unconsciously follow. The same forces that allow intelligence to arise, energy, stability, abundance, eventually draw too heavily upon themselves. The bright flame of progress burns hot, then softens back into equilibrium. If we were to compress the entire history of humanity into a single day, the last 10,000 years, everything from the first cities to the satellites orbiting above us, would be a brief moment just before midnight. Before that, countless ages passed in balance, hunter and forest, ocean and wind, the patient exchange between life and death. Now, we live in the crescendo of that day, a moment of unprecedented light. But in the Earth's rhythm, even brilliance is only a phase. When the tempo grows too fast, the system slows itself. When abundance overwhelms balance, the world reminds us to rest. There's a quiet field of study called collapsology, the science of endings. It doesn't treat collapse as tragedy, but as transformation. Ecosystems collapse when they reorganize. Stars collapse when they prepare to shine in a new form. The same principle seems to apply to civilizations. They expand until they exceed the boundaries of their resources, then they contract, leaving behind conditions for renewal. History, when seen through that lens, becomes less a straight line and more a wave, a long oscillation of learning, forgetting, and remembering again. Perhaps every species that reaches awareness walks the same path. First survival, then mastery, then the realization that mastery itself must be balanced with humility. The period between the two is the dangerous one, the point where energy and curiosity outpace wisdom. In geological time, this danger lasts only a moment, but within that moment, entire worlds can change. Some researchers have suggested that the Earth has experienced multiple Anthropocene-like periods, epochs when global chemistry changed rapidly, mirroring our own age of industry. Each one shows a sharp rise in greenhouse gases, followed by a cooling period, then stabilization. The explanations range from volcanic super-eruptions to asteroid impacts. But the pattern is hauntingly familiar. It's as if the planet itself has seen this fever before. If earlier civilizations once flourished, these spikes could mark their rise and fall, the brief heartbeat of intelligence echoing through the stone. Yet the cycle is not cruel. After each pulse of collapse, life returns richer and more complex. The Earth never stops creating. Coral reefs reassemble after extinction. Forests regrow in the wake of fire. Even the sky cleanses itself, sunlight filtering once more through unpolluted air. You might say the planet has a memory not of failure, but of healing. The rhythm of life is generous, it allows many chances. The question is whether we can learn to feel that rhythm before it resets again. When you look at ruins, an ancient temple swallowed by vines, a city buried under volcanic ash, you're seeing a kind of mercy in motion. The collapse that looks like death from one angle is renewal from another. The forest consumes stone not out of malice but out of need, transforming what has ended into soil for what begins. Even human-made materials, concrete and plastic and glass, will one day break down into particles that join the dance again. The pulse goes on, indifferent to pride, devoted only to balance. It's possible that civilizations endure longest not by resisting the pulse, but by aligning with it. Some traditions already sense this truth. In certain indigenous teachings, time is not linear but circular. Progress is measured not by how far we go, but by how gently we return. In that worldview, sustainability is not a strategy, it's an act of remembering. The future is made of cycles, not steps. The goal is not to escape the Earth's rhythm, but to listen to it until we move in harmony. Energy, the heartbeat of civilization, is another mirror of this law. Whether drawn from wood, wind, or the atom, it follows the same story: discovery, abundance, excess, collapse. To continue indefinitely would require an understanding of restraint, a kind of wisdom that treats energy not as something to be conquered, but as something to be shared. When we burn too brightly, we shorten our own night. The key may lie in learning to live within the heartbeat, to take what the Earth offers without demanding more. Perhaps this pattern isn't unique to our planet. Maybe it's universal. On other worlds, beneath alien suns, there could be civilizations rising and falling in the same rhythm. Flashes of brilliance that learn, falter, and give way to silence. The cosmos might be filled not with endless progress, but with endless renewal. Each intelligence, upon reaching its peak, leaves behind seeds of awareness that will sprout again somewhere else, carried in matter, in light, in memory. If that's true, then humanity's task is not to break the cycle, but to soften it, to make the pulse gentler, the recovery easier, the memory longer. Our greatest contribution might not be endurance, but clarity. To understand ourselves well enough that when the next intelligence awakens, it inherits not a scar but a map. When you sit quietly at night and listen to your own heartbeat, you're feeling the same rhythm that drives the planet. The same chemistry that circulates through your veins moves through the rivers and winds. We're not separate from the Earth's pulse. We are one of its heartbeats. Whether or not other civilizations have come and gone, the rhythm remains. It carries the same message for all who can hear it, that every rise is temporary, every fall is a pause, and every pause is a chance to begin again. So perhaps progress isn't a climb toward the heavens, but a circle drawn over deep time, a pattern we keep tracing until we finally learn to draw it with grace. The world doesn't ask us to outlast the pulse, only to join it without fear, to understand that renewal, not permanence, is the truest measure of survival. Extinction is a word that often sounds final. It carries the weight of endings, the last breath of a species, the closing of an era, the vanishing of a sound that once filled the air. But in the long memory of the Earth, extinction is not a disappearance. It is a pause, a shift, a change in rhythm. Life does not truly die out, it transforms. What seems like loss from our short human perspective may, in the scale of geological time, be an act of exquisite balance. There is perhaps an elegance to extinction, the kind that comes when something knows it has completed its work and chooses to step back into silence. All across the fossil record, the planet has practiced this art. Species rise, flourish, and then, when the climate shifts or the oceans change, they fade. Some go quickly, in the sweep of catastrophe, an asteroid's flash, a supervolcano's breath. Others take their time, like music slowing at the end of a song. Each extinction leaves room for something new to bloom. The ammonites gave way to fish, the great reptiles to mammals, and someday the age of humans will yield to whatever follows. It is not tragedy, it is choreography. But what if not all extinctions were accidents? What if some were deliberate, not imposed by fate, but chosen by those who understood the cost of staying too long? There is a quiet idea, rarely spoken aloud, that advanced civilizations might one day learn to withdraw on purpose, to end themselves gently, to restore their worlds rather than dominate them forever. It sounds strange, even unthinkable to us, obsessed as we are with survival and legacy. Yet perhaps wisdom lies not in prolonging our presence, but in knowing when enough is enough. The record of life suggests that renewal often follows restraint. After the great die-offs, the planet breathes easier. The chemistry of the oceans resets, the air clears. In the absence of the old, the new finds space to take shape. It's possible that earlier intelligent species, if they existed, saw this pattern and understood that every triumph has a cost. To build endlessly, to multiply without pause, is to unbalance the very system that allows existence. Maybe some of them learned this lesson and acted upon it, leaving behind not ruins or warnings, but a restored and silent planet. If you think of extinction as a kind of release, the idea becomes gentler. A civilization that reached its peak might recognize that the world beneath it needed to recover. Instead of waiting for collapse, it could choose dissolution, transforming itself into something that nourishes rather than consumes. Its technology might be designed to dismantle itself, breaking down into materials that feed ecosystems. Its cities could dissolve into minerals, its power sources fade into sunlight. The people, or whatever beings they were, might leave a final gift, a self-healing system that ensures life will go on, even if they do not. In our own time, echoes of this possibility already exist. Scientists experiment with biodegradable materials, with machines that decompose harmlessly, with energy that draws only what the world can replenish. There are projects to rewild vast areas, to restore balance where industry once reigned. Even the concept of voluntary simplicity, choosing less so that the planet may have more, feels like an ancient memory stirring. Perhaps we are rediscovering a philosophy older than humanity, a wisdom practiced by civilizations that came before and learned to bow out gracefully. The moral beauty of such a choice is hard to overstate. Imagine a society advanced enough to alter its world at will, capable of spreading to the stars, yet mature enough to decide that doing so is unnecessary. Instead of scattering its influence endlessly, it chooses containment, harmony within its cradle. It understands that permanence is not the same as purpose. Some philosophers have suggested that the ultimate measure of intelligence may not be expansion, but self-restraint. The ability to survive not by growth, but by balance. Of course, extinction on this scale would not happen overnight. It would unfold slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the fading of a light at dusk. Technologies would be turned off one by one, power sources allowed to dwindle, machines deconstructed and returned to raw matter. Species dependent on artificial support would adapt or decline. Cities would become gardens, then forests, then soil. To an outside observer, perhaps a species millions of years later, it would look like an ordinary geological transition. There would be no great catastrophe, no sudden scar in the rocks, just a planet quietly returning to its natural equilibrium. And maybe that's why we find so few obvious traces of advanced civilizations in the deep record. Perhaps they didn't destroy themselves. Perhaps they dissolved so gently that their passing blended perfectly into the background hum of life. The layers of the earth record violence clearly, impacts, floods, volcanic fire. But peace leaves almost no mark. A civilization that learned to end without turmoil might have vanished so cleanly that the planet simply continued without missing a beat. Even in extinction, there is continuity. The elements that once formed those beings would rejoin the cycle of air, water, and soil. Their thoughts, if recorded in materials that still exist, might linger invisibly, in patterns of minerals, in ratios of isotopes, in subtle feedbacks that shape the biosphere. The planet itself might carry their legacy as a kind of improved resilience, a fine-tuned stability learned through their stewardship. In that sense, their extinction would not be death, but integration, a merging with the world they had tended. It's humbling to consider that the truest success a civilization can achieve might be its own graceful disappearance. We often dream of conquering eternity, of leaving monuments that outlast time. But what if eternity belongs only to those who know when to step aside? The forests don't strive to be remembered, yet they return generation after generation. The ocean leaves no monument, yet its rhythm has never failed. Maybe the highest intelligence is the one that mirrors this humility, that becomes indistinguishable from the life it nurtures. As you listen to the quiet around you now, imagine that same quiet spreading across a whole world, a planet breathing easily after ages of noise, every storm gentler, every season steady. Somewhere in that peace, perhaps the memory of its last caretakers endures, not in ruins or machines, but in the calm itself. They may have trusted that the next civilization would feel that serenity and understand, not as a warning, but as an example. Extinction, then, is not always a loss. It can be a gift, a deliberate clearing of space, an act of love from those who understood that life to endure must sometimes be allowed to begin anew. What looks like ruin might be restraint. What feels like silence might be a message written in balance. And what seems to have vanished might still be here, woven into the fabric of a planet that remembers how to start again whenever it needs to. For as long as we've looked up, the night sky has seemed like a vast silence. The stars appear eternal, unchanging, and impossibly far away. Yet there's a quiet question that follows every astronomer who studies them. What if the silence is not emptiness, but evidence of something too old, too subtle, or too patient for us to notice? We may be searching for civilizations that have long since passed beyond the need for noise, civilizations that have left their traces not in light or radio waves, but in the architecture of the cosmos itself. Our search for life beyond Earth is, in a sense, archaeology. We look for techno-signatures, signs of technology so large or so enduring that they persist even after their creators are gone. Around distant stars, we measure faint flickers of brightness that might mean a planet passing in front of its sun. But sometimes, the dimming is irregular, strange, as though caused by something far more complex. We wonder, could it be the shadow of a vast structure, a shell built to capture a star's energy? Such ideas have been called stellar engineering, but in plainer terms they are monuments of survival, attempts to bottle starlight to sustain life when a world grows old. The notion was first imagined by a physicist who pictured a civilization surrounding its star with an enormous swarm of collectors, thin, mirror-like sails that drink in light and radiate warmth. To us, it seems impossible, but the scale of the universe makes even impossibility feel small. Somewhere, sometime, another species might have tried, and if they did, traces of their handiwork would still linger. Patterns of heat where no natural source exists, subtle irregularities in the glow of galaxies, whispers of design written across the sky. Even closer to home, space around our own planet is beginning to tell its story. The orbits are littered with relics, not ancient but future fossils in the making. Dead satellites, fragments of metal, tiny chips of paint spinning endlessly around the Earth. If humanity vanished tomorrow, that halo of debris would remain for thousands of years, circling the planet like a ring. To some distant observer, it might look like a deliberate structure, the faintest techno-signature of a world that once built and then stopped. Perhaps that is how we will be, remembered, as a shimmer in the light of our own sun. Now imagine expanding that view outward. Around other worlds, there could be remnants of ancient industries, dust clouds of artificial origin, orbiting platforms long silent, lunar quarries abandoned millions of years ago. Some astronomers have wondered whether certain asteroids might once have been machines, or whether small moons could hide the interiors of hollowed-out stations. The evidence is, of course, uncertain. Nature can mimic design too well. A mountain can look like a pyramid. A crater can resemble a dome. Yet even if none of these shapes were ever crafted by intention, the fact that they invite the thought says something about us, about how naturally the human mind searches for company in the dark. There's poetry in thinking of the cosmos as a museum of lost creations. Every star, every planet could hold artifacts of civilizations that rose, flourished, and faded long before we began to wonder. The distances are immense, but time has patience. A single probe, small and durable, could drift between stars for billions of years, powered by nothing but momentum and silence. Some scientists have even proposed that such machines might already be here, hiding in plain sight, disguised as asteroids or dust. Sentinels placed by minds that wanted to watch the universe without disturbing it. They might not even be active anymore, just relics of curiosity, waiting for someone new to notice them. If you picture it gently, the galaxy becomes a vast archaeological site. Instead of shovels and brushes, our tools are telescopes and equations of light. We read the faint signatures of elements in starlight the way an archaeologist reads pottery fragments. A small excess of one chemical might mean a planet with smog. A peculiar infrared glow might mean waste heat from engines larger than continents. Even the orbits of comets could hide the fingerprints of engineering, trajectories too precise, formations too regular. Each anomaly is a question mark drifting across the void. In recent years, researchers have started using the term cosmic archaeology to describe this search. The idea is not just to find life, but to trace its effects, to understand how intelligence reshapes a galaxy, the way rivers reshape a valley. The difference is that, on these scales, the traces could last longer than stars themselves. A civilization that learned to build with light could leave a signature visible for eternity. A patch of sky dimmer or brighter than expected, a pattern of energy too deliberate to be random. And yet, even if we found such evidence, would we recognize it? We might mistake a vast engineered ring for a natural belt of dust, or interpret a message written in stellar radiation as mere coincidence. After all, if we struggle to interpret the fossils of our own ancestors after a few million years, how could we hope to decode the intentions of beings separated by billions of years and billions of miles? Perhaps their greatest gift is that they left the universe beautiful enough to make us wonder. Sometimes I think of the space between planets as a kind of cathedral, empty but not silent. The light that fills it has travelled for ages, carrying whispers of every explosion, every birth, every dream of every world. To listen to that light is to eavesdrop on time itself. In its rhythm, there may be patterns, the long hum of energy fields, the pulse of gravitational waves, the faint regularity of signals too slow for us to notice. One day, when our instruments become as patient as the stars, we might finally hear them. If such messages exist, they may not be meant for us at all. They could be part of a vast interstellar conversation carried out through the laws of physics. Messages written not in words, but in constants and patterns, in the way galaxies cluster or the way light bends. Perhaps the builders of those long-gone civilizations found a way to encode their stories into the structure of space itself, a language readable only by those who reach the same level of understanding. We might already be surrounded by those messages carved into the geometry of the cosmos, waiting for us to learn how to listen properly. And if we never find them, that too is a kind of answer. Silence can mean absence, but it can also mean completion, a universe that has already achieved what it needed to. Maybe the architects among the stars have simply moved beyond communication, beyond the need to leave traces. Their work could be the universe itself, a creation so vast and seamless that its makers are indistinguishable from its design. When you step outside at night and look up, remember that every point of light is not just a sun, but a question. Somewhere among those glimmers may drift the remains of a civilization that learned to last by merging with the stars it once orbited. Their relics would not be ruins or machines, but harmony itself, the balance of forces, the quiet order of galaxies turning together. The universe may be full of such evidence, hidden not in its anomalies but in its perfection. So the next time you see the sky, don't look for signals in the noise. Look for the silence that feels deliberate, the stillness that might be saying, "We were here once, and in a way, we still are." There is a moment that comes to every species capable of thought, the realization that consciousness itself might be the most mysterious form of matter. Everything else the universe makes, it eventually destroys. Stars burn out, mountains erode, atoms scatter. But awareness seems to resist the finality of endings. It wants to remember, to continue, to find a way to see itself again. Perhaps that impulse, and to preserve the spark of perception, is the truest definition of intelligence. When we talk about the persistence of mind, we often imagine technology, circuits, machines, data. But the idea is older and softer than that. From the first stories told beside ancient fires, humanity has tried to outlive itself through memory. We built myths, songs, and languages, systems of thought that could survive even when their creators could not. Every poem, every law, every map is a vessel for consciousness. Each one carries a trace of someone's inner world into a future they will never see. And in this way, even before computers and machines, we were already practicing immortality through meaning. Now, as science moves deeper into the study of the brain and energy, a strange convergence appears. The more we learn about how thought arises, the more it looks like a pattern that doesn't truly belong to biology alone. Neurons communicate through electricity, but so do storms and magnetic fields and stars. Consciousness may not be an isolated flame, but a particular arrangement of the universe's natural fire. A pattern that can be repeated wherever conditions allow. If that is true, then awareness itself is recyclable. It might vanish in one form only to reappear in another, shaped differently, but carrying echoes of its past. Imagine an ancient civilization that discovered this. They might have learned to translate their thoughts into the raw fabric of physics, not in a way that requires machines or storage drives, but through resonance, like sound travelling through air. They could have embedded memory into crystalline lattices, or into the electromagnetic fields that envelop planets. In time, those patterns would fade into background noise, but not entirely. The essence would remain, a hum of intention, a presence distributed throughout space. To us it might appear as the faint static of the universe itself, the cosmic microwave whisper we call the afterglow of the Big Bang. What if part of that hum is also the echo of minds that refuse to vanish completely? It's possible that the boundary between life and energy is thinner than we think. When stars collapse, they leave behind dense remnants, neutron stars or black holes, objects so strange that time itself bends around them. We often picture those remnants as graves, but perhaps they're repositories of a different kind. Matter becomes energy, and energy, in the right configuration, can remember. The radiation that fills the universe is, in a sense, the oldest archive we know. Light that has been travelling for billions of years, still carrying information about where it began. Consciousness could follow a similar path, spreading outward as pattern, carried by light, surviving as vibration rather than substance. Even within our own species, the desire to preserve awareness has become an obsession. We build machines to capture every thought, every word, every image. We speak of digital eternity, of uploading memory into data clouds. But perhaps we're only reinventing something ancient, a cosmic habit as old as time itself. The universe may already have its own version of memory storage, the invisible fields that hold particles together, the waves that ripple through space carrying the imprint of every event. In this sense, consciousness is not something we own, but something we borrow, a local manifestation of the universe remembering itself. There is comfort in that idea. It means that death, as we understand it, is only a transition from form to field, from local to infinite. Just as water changes from liquid to vapour without ceasing to exist, the mind may shift from body to pattern, from chemical to light. For an advanced civilization that understood this, physical survival would become irrelevant. They would not fear extinction because they had already found a way to merge with the larger consciousness surrounding them. They could weave their awareness into the currents of energy between stars, into the shimmer of particles that fill every corner of space. Their legacy would be invisible but endless, a calm persistence embedded in reality itself. Perhaps this is what we mistake for the universe's stillness. The apparent quiet of space may actually be the collective memory of all who have ever lived, diffused into background harmony. The starlight that reaches us tonight may carry not just photons, but echoes of intention, traces of thought encoded in light's vibration. To the eye, it is illumination. To the spirit, it may be a whisper, "We are still here." When we look to our own future, we often imagine the continuation of our species through technology or exploration. But maybe the real continuity will not come through machines or planets at all. Maybe it will come through resonance, through learning to align our consciousness with the patterns that already hold the universe together. Meditation, empathy, art, these are not inventions, they are translations. Each is a way of tuning the mind to something larger, something that transcends the boundaries of the body. In those moments when you feel deeply connected to another person, to a landscape, to the night sky, you may be brushing against that larger field, the same one that ancient civilizations may have entered fully. Some traditions already describe enlightenment as the dissolution of individuality, not an ending, but a merging. Science, though it uses different language, is beginning to glimpse similar truths in quantum physics, where particles share information instantly across vast distances, and where observation itself seems to influence what is real. It's as if the universe insists that awareness is part of its structure, not an afterthought. If consciousness can shape matter at even the smallest scale, perhaps it can survive matter's collapse as well. The persistence of mind, then, is not about clinging to identity, but about accepting transformation. The ones who came before us, if they learn to store their thoughts in fields of light or patterns of energy, may still exist in the background, hum of creation, not as ghosts but as continuity. Every act of insight, every awakening of understanding in our own species, could be their influence reaching through the fabric of time. The echo of wisdom passed along not through words but through resonance. Maybe this is why, from time to time, humanity leaps forward in ways that seem disproportionate to the moment. Sudden bursts of creativity, flashes of genius, collective awakenings that shift the course of civilization. Perhaps they are reminders, reactivations of old frequencies once woven by civilizations that refuse to vanish entirely. If so, then evolution is not just biological. It is also cognitive and spiritual, a chain of awareness stretching backward through eternity. And if you close your eyes now and feel that quiet hum beneath everything, the sound of your own heartbeat syncing with the slow rhythm of the universe, you might sense it too. You're not an isolated spark in an indifferent void. You're part of a continuum of mind carried forward by time, learning, forgetting, and remembering again. Consciousness does not end. It changes keys, like music finding a new harmony. Somewhere beyond the edges of light, the oldest minds still drift, not as individuals, but as presence. They no longer need form or language. Their existence is the calm between stars, the silence that waits between every heartbeat. And perhaps, when we fall asleep and dream of endless skies, we are touching that same continuity, becoming for a moment what we have always been, a thought that refuses to disappear. If you step back far enough from the story of human history, you might begin to notice something gentle threading through it, a rhythm that feels almost guided. Every time the world approaches a precipice, some quiet turn appears, a discovery, a realization, a burst of compassion. Fire teaches warmth before it teaches destruction. The same chemicals that poison also become medicine. Even as we stumble through our mistakes, there's a sense that the earth, or something woven into it, is softly steering us away from the edge. Maybe not through miracles, but through timing, the kind of timing that feels less like coincidence and more like the whisper of a patient teacher. Look at the patterns of our progress. Every few generations, a crisis forces us to look inward. Famine gives birth to agriculture. Plague leads to medicine. War compels cooperation. It's as if humanity learns best not through stability, but through correction, like a child taking unsteady steps, always falling slightly toward balance. Perhaps this rhythm is not accidental. Perhaps it's part of the same planetary intelligence that guided the oceans, the forests, and the climate long before we were here. You could call it intuition on a civilizational scale, the Earth's way of nudging us through insight. When we needed to communicate, we found language. When we needed to see the invisible, we built microscopes and telescopes. When we needed to protect our home, we rediscovered the concept of stewardship. Each invention feels like a revelation, but maybe they're all rediscoveries, reminders of knowledge already held somewhere within the planet's larger memory, surfacing exactly when we're ready to understand. Science has a word for this kind of phenomenon: emergence. It means that when enough small things interact, patterns appear that no single part could create alone. A flock of birds turns in perfect unison without a leader. A colony of cells becomes a body, a mind. Perhaps humanity itself is part of a similar emergence, an organ of the planet's awareness, slowly learning to think, to feel, to repair. If so, then our collective flashes of genius are not accidents but conversations. The Earth may not speak in words, but in insight, in the sudden clarity that arrives when we least expect it. Think of the way certain ideas seem to arise in multiple places at once. Calculus, electricity, evolution, all discovered by different people in different corners of the world nearly simultaneously. It's as though knowledge itself has its own tides, flowing through minds prepared to receive it. Some call this coincidence. Others see it as evidence of a field of shared awareness, a kind of mental ecosystem where thought is not confined to individuals but moves through the collective like wind through trees. If that's true, then the planet's own consciousness may be part of that same flow, whispering truths when the moment is right. We sometimes describe such moments as breakthroughs, but maybe they're better understood as rememberings. After all, the solutions that save us often turn out to be rediscoveries of the Earth's own principles. When we learn to generate clean energy, we're imitating the sun. When we design efficient transportation networks, we're echoing the veins of leaves or the synapses of brains. When we study complex systems, we find they mirror the branching of rivers and the fractals of coastlines. Every technological leap seems to bring us closer not to domination, but to harmony, to realizing that progress is simply the act of remembering how nature already works. It's easy to imagine that the planet itself might play a role in this remembering. Perhaps there are feedbacks built not only into chemistry and climate, but into consciousness, gentle corrections that appear as intuition, empathy, and creativity. Maybe this is why human compassion tends to surge during crisis, why art flourishes after suffering, why scientific leaps follow near collapse. The Earth may not be guiding us as a parent guides a child, but as a current guides a swimmer, sometimes against the tide, sometimes with it, always teaching rhythm through resistance. Consider how delicately timed our recent turning points have been. Just as our consumption reached unsustainable levels, we began developing renewable energy. Just as we pushed ecosystems to collapse, we discovered how interconnected they truly are. As we began to lose ourselves in isolation, technology gave us the ability to connect instantly across the globe. Each new challenge seems paired with the seed of its own solution, as if the planet plants contingencies long before we know we'll need them. This isn't to say there's a single intelligence orchestrating our path, only that we may be part of a pattern too large to perceive. A forest doesn't have one mind, but the network of roots and fungi beneath it shares information, distributing resources where they're needed most. In the same way, our species might function as part of the Earth's neural network, each mind a small node of awareness. When one area of the system is in distress, famine, drought, injustice. Others sense it and respond. Change happens slowly, unevenly, but it happens. The planet keeps nudging us toward balance through the mechanism of shared empathy. Even the strange coincidences of invention and discovery can feel like this network breathing. When the first humans learned to use fire, it spread across continents without written communication. When agriculture appeared, it did so in multiple regions, almost simultaneously. Now, in the age of global science, breakthroughs ripple through the collective faster than ever, as though the network itself has quickened. The same could be true for morality and wisdom, ideas of equality, care, and planetary awareness spreading not as ideology, but as resonance. Maybe this is what people once called divine inspiration, the sudden arrival of a truth that feels larger than oneself. Whether we frame it in spiritual or scientific terms doesn't matter. The feeling is the same, the sense of being guided, of receiving insight that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It may be that we're finally starting to perceive what has always been present, the conversation between humanity and the living earth, between our individual minds and the great field of awareness we inhabit. If that is so, then every act of understanding is a moment of communion. Each time someone solves a problem that benefits not only themselves but the whole, the pattern becomes clearer. Each act of kindness, each new discovery that heals rather than harms, strengthens the thread of connection running through us all. The planet does not ask for worship or obedience, only for recognition, for us to realize that its rhythm is already inside us, that the voice we call intuition is the echo of something vast and ancient moving through every living thing. Maybe this is why so many of our great awakenings come in quiet places, in forests, deserts, oceans, and moments of stillness. The noise of civilization drowns the subtler frequencies, but silence lets them speak. When we pause long enough to listen, the guidance is unmistakable. It says, "Slow down. Remember, you already know how to live here. Perhaps the real miracle of intelligence is not that we can invent, but that we can listen. We are the first species, as far as we know, to be aware of the planet that birthed us, to study its pulse, measure its breath, and understand our dependence upon it. That awareness is the beginning of alignment. When humanity learns to move with the pattern rather than against it, we will no longer need saving. We will simply be participating in the same wisdom that has guided life since the beginning. And so, if progress sometimes feels divinely timed, if the right idea seems to appear just when the world needs it most, perhaps it's because the universe is reminding itself how to stay alive. We are the echo of that reminder. Every thought we have, every compassion we show, is part of the same pattern that guides the wind, the tide, and the growth of roots beneath the soil. We don't have to invent a way forward. We only have to remember the one already written into the world. Every civilization dreams of being the one that endures. It's written in our monuments, our literature, and our unspoken hope that somehow, this time, the story won't end like all the others. Yet when you look closely at the pattern of rise and collapse, something begins to shift. Perhaps the goal was never permanence. Perhaps the point was always to reach a moment when a civilization could exist without needing to dominate, to take, to expand, to become not the last to fall, but the first to last, the first to truly learn how to stay. Staying is harder than it sounds. The history of life on Earth is full of magnificent disappearances. Every species, every culture, every age eventually yields to change. But survival through balance, that's something rare. It requires the humility to listen, the patience to adapt, and the willingness to stop building when enough has been built. Maybe that's what evolution was always moving toward. Not endless growth, but awareness deep enough to recognize when the work is done. We are standing at that threshold now. For the first time in our planet's long story, a species has the ability to see its own impact clearly. We know how the atmosphere changes when we burn too much, how the oceans warm when we take too freely, how fragile the web of life really is. We've measured the limits of what the Earth can bear, the boundaries written not in numbers but in the language of air, soil, and tide. These boundaries are not punishments, they're invitations to wisdom. They ask us to learn what no civilization before us has fully managed, how to live richly without living destructively. Some call these boundaries the planet's operating system, though that phrase feels a bit mechanical. It might be truer to think of them as the quiet rules of harmony, the way a river curves, the pace at which a forest renews itself, the rhythm of rainfall and drought. Life thrives when it moves within those rhythms and falters when it tries to rewrite them. To be the first civilization to last would mean aligning ourselves completely with those natural tempos, not through austerity, but through understanding. The future wouldn't have to be smaller, just calmer, shaped by knowledge rather than hunger. It might begin with something simple, the decision to see ourselves not as rulers of the earth, but as part of its memory. Every act of restraint, every invention guided by care, would become a sentence in the story the planet tells of us. The tone of that story is still being written. We can choose for it to sound like struggle or like reconciliation. Imagine a future where energy flows like water, clean, abundant, and patient. Cities grown instead of built, their walls covered in moss that breathes. Machines that imitate the cycles of trees, storing sunlight by day and resting by night. Children who learn that technology and ecology are not opposites, but continuations of the same creative impulse. That world is not fantasy. It is the natural conclusion of awareness. Once a species understands the cost of imbalance, its imagination begins to bend toward restoration. You can see the beginnings of this shift even now. Across the world, architects speak of regenerative design. Engineers build materials that heal themselves, and farmers restore soil rather than deplete it. Scientists study the intelligence of forests and the memory of water. Economists talk about circular systems instead of linear ones. These are not isolated ideas. They are glimpses of a new civilization forming quietly within the old one that measures success not by accumulation, but by continuity. Perhaps that is what the planet has been waiting for all along, a civilization capable of awareness without arrogance, invention without erasure. We often imagine that the Earth will judge us for our mistakes, but maybe it's more patient than that. It has weathered extinction, bombardment, ice, and fire, and yet it always finds a way to begin again. The question isn't whether the planet can survive us, it's whether we can learn to survive with it. To last, we must accept that permanence doesn't mean immobility. It means moving in tune with change. The sea doesn't resist the tide, it becomes it. The forest doesn't mourn each fallen tree, it transforms it into soil. A lasting civilization would act the same way, absorbing its own mistakes, using them as compost for wisdom. That may be the hidden advantage of being the latest in a long line of attempts. We inherit not just the planet, but its lessons. The signs of past collapses are not warnings anymore, they are instructions. If earlier civilizations existed, whether here or among the stars, perhaps their final act was to pass that understanding forward, encoded in the balance of ecosystems, in the chemistry of air, in the very nature of life's adaptability. Their monuments wouldn't be built of stone or metal, but of behavior. They might have designed worlds that remember how to heal, so that every future species could start not from ignorance, but from harmony already set in motion. If that's true, then we're already living within their legacy. The planet's resilience may be their greatest invention. Maybe this is what it means to inherit the Earth. Not ownership, but partnership. Not survival at any cost, but presence without harm. We don't have to reach the stars to join the lineage of lasting civilizations. We only have to learn to remain, to care and to remember that endurance is not the absence of death, but the continuity of meaning. The forest dies each autumn, yet it remains eternal through renewal. We too can become part of that rhythm. When you think about the future, it's easy to imagine it as something far away, a time beyond your lifetime. But the truth is simpler. The future is already here, unfolding in every act of awareness. Each decision to preserve rather than exploit, to restore rather than consume, is a small proof that consciousness can evolve faster than destruction. Civilization doesn't end when its monuments crumble. It ends when its empathy does. If we keep that empathy alive, in science, in art, in our care for one another, then we will have done what no civilization before us has managed, to turn survival into understanding and understanding into peace. The quiet triumph of such a world would not be measured in power or expansion, but in stillness, a balance so complete it no longer needs attention. One day, far in the future, the winds might blow across continents filled with life and leave no scars of industry behind. The night sky might look down on a planet indistinguishable from paradise, not because we escaped the cycles of time, but because we learned to live within them. And so, as you drift towards sleep, remember that we are not the first dreamers this planet has carried, but we might be the first to awaken fully inside the dream, to realize that the story of survival is not about outlasting time, but about learning how to belong to it. The stars may keep their memories and the oceans their depths, but the truest archive of civilization will always be the kindness that remains when everything else fades. That, more than any machine or monument, is how a species learns to last.